I was standing in the doorway of my grandmother's dining room when I heard my aunt say that. My Aunt Ruth Ann. She is not a Voss. She married into my mother's family when I was 11 years old, which means she has never been related to my grandmother by anything other than proximity and my mother's habit of bringing her own people into spaces they were not born into. There were four women at the table. They were dividing my grandmother's jewelry. My grandmother had been dead for 9 hours. The pieces they were sorting through were costume jewelry, department store gold, and three items my grandmother had purchased herself in the last year of her life, specifically so there would be something on the table for them to divide. The real pieces, the sapphire ring, the pearl set, the garnet brooch that had come from Hungary in 1951, were on a shelf in my apartment in Portland. They had been there for 6 months. My grandmother had mailed them to me herself, wrapped in dish towels, with a note I still have. My name is Mara Voss. I am 29 years old. I want to tell you about my grandmother because the jewelry is not the story. The story is who she was and what she knew and what she did about it, quietly, on a Tuesday morning in June at 81 years old, when her hands were not what they used to be, and she had decided that some things needed to be settled before anyone else got the chance to unsettle them. Her name was Erzsébet Voss. Everyone who loved her called her Erzsi. She came to the United States from Hungary in 1965 at the age of 22, alone, with a suitcase and the English she had taught herself from a phrase book and a handful of American films she had seen at a cinema in Budapest. She settled in Akron, Ohio, where there was a Hungarian community, not large, but present, the kind of community you move toward when you have left everything else behind. She married a man named Thomas Voss, an American with German grandparents who could not speak Hungarian and never particularly tried, which Evgie found either charming or irrelevant, depending on her mood when she was telling the story. They had two children. One of them was my father. My grandmother learned to live in English for the world and in Hungarian for herself, which is a very specific kind of bilingualism, the kind where one language is for getting things done and the other is for knowing who you are. I spent every summer of my childhood at her house in Akron. I was there from the first week of June until the last week of August, every year from the time I was 6 until I was 22, and the summers were no longer long enough to spend the whole of them anywhere. I learned Hungarian at her kitchen table, not in a formal way. There were no lessons, no workbooks, no deliberate pedagogy. It happened the way language happens when you are a child inside it, through repetition, through context, through the specific texture of a kitchen in summer with the radio on and your grandmother telling you the name of every vegetable she is chopping and every dish she is making and every place she has ever been. By the time I was 10, I could follow a conversation. By 12, I could hold one. By 16, I could dream in it, which is, my grandmother told me, how you know a language has gotten inside you. She told me things in Hungarian that she never said in English. I understood this even as a child, that the language was a room not everyone could enter, and that she had let me in. She told me about Budapest, about the street she grew up on and the smell of the bakery on the corner and the particular quality of light on the Danube on winter mornings. She told me about the border crossing in 1965, which she described with a precision that suggested she had kept every detail on purpose, as though forgetting it would be a second leaving. She told me about the coat, her mother's coat, which crossed the border in 1951, 14 years before Erzsi did, with the garnet brooch pinned inside the lining, hidden under the hem, because her grandmother had decided that if she was going to leave Budapest, she was not going to leave it empty-handed. The brooch had a name in the family. Erzsi called it a piros virág, the red flower. It was Hungarian Art Nouveau, she said, made sometime around 1905, which meant it was already 40 years old when it went into the coat lining. Her grandmother had worn it to every important occasion of her life and called it her witness, the thing that had seen everything. When it arrived in Akron in 1951, in the care of Erji's mother, Erji was 9 years old. She understood, with the particular clarity children sometimes have about objects, that the brooch was the kind of thing that mattered. She kept it for 50 years. Then she put it in a package and mailed it to Portland, because she had decided that I was the next person who should know what it had seen. I did not grow up in a family that was easy to be the odd one out of, and I was, in most legible ways, the odd one out. My mother, Diane, who married my father at 24 and has been managing the Voss family's logistics ever since with the energy of someone who confuses organizing events with belonging to them, never learned Hungarian. She has spent 34 years in this family not learning it, which is, when you consider that she had 34 years and a grandmother-in-law who would have happily taught her, a choice that tells you something. When I was small, when Erzsi and I would speak Hungarian together at the dinner table, or in the kitchen, or in the car on the way to the grocery store, my mother would say, with a lightness she had practiced until it sounded effortless, "I never know what you two are saying over there." She said it with a smile. She said it every time. And the thing she never said, the thing underneath the smile, was that she minded. Not the not knowing exactly, but the fact that there was a room she couldn't get into, and that I was in it, and that the person holding the door open for me was her mother-in-law, and not her. I did not understand this as a child. I understand it now. I understand it the way you understand things retrospectively. When the full shape of a pattern becomes visible, only once you are far enough from the middle of it to see the edges. My mother was not cruel to me in the ways that leave marks you can show people. She was absent in a way that was harder to name. Present at every gathering, organizing every holiday, sending every group email, and somehow, consistently, not quite there for the things that mattered to me specifically. When I was 24 and was offered a contract that would let me move to Portland and build a career I had been working toward for 3 years, I told the family at Easter. My mother said, "Portland? Why Portland? There's nothing pulling you out there." And when I explained the contract, explained the hospital system, explained that this was what I had been working toward, she said, "I just hope you're not running away from something." She said it at the table. My father was there, 2 aunts, 3 cousins. I passed the dinner rolls. I did not respond. I had learned, by 24, that some conversations have already happened by the time you're invited into them, and that the invitation is not really an invitation. Erzsi called me the night after that Easter dinner. She called me in Hungarian, which is how I knew it was going to be a real conversation and not a navigational one. She said, "Your mother is afraid of distance. She thinks distance means disapproval. You're not disapproving of anything. You're just going somewhere." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things that were actually very precise. And then she asked me about Portland, what the contract was, what the city was like, whether I had found an apartment yet. And she listened with the specific quality of attention she always gave me, which was the quality of someone who assumes the person they are talking to is interesting and capable and worth listening to carefully. I did not take this for granted. I had other people in my life who listened like they were waiting for their turn. Erzsi listened like she was taking notes. I moved to Portland in the fall of 2019. I built my practice, medical translation, English and German and Hungarian, clinical documents and pharmaceutical materials, and patient records for hospitals and research institutions. The Hungarian was a specialty that separated me from most other translators in my field. There are not many people who can translate Hungarian medical documentation at a clinical level. I'm one of them. I owe that entirely to a kitchen in Akron and a woman who talked to me every summer for 22 years as though the language was worth passing on, because she knew it was. I visited Akron every year, usually in the fall. I called Erji every week, usually on Sundays, usually for between 20 minutes and an hour in Hungarian. My mother was aware of the calls. I don't know if she knew the full frequency or the duration. I don't think she asked. By 2022, when Erji's health had started its decline, congestive heart failure, diagnosed in the spring, the prognosis measured in seasons rather than decades, my mother had positioned herself as the primary point of contact for Erji's medical care. She scheduled appointments. She forwarded summaries to the family email chain. She communicated with the in-home care agency about scheduling and preferences. She did all of this efficiently and without asking me, which would have been fine if the issue were purely logistical. But the issue was not purely logistical. The issue was that Erji had preferences and fears and wishes, and she expressed them most fully and most honestly in Hungarian. And I was the only person in the family who could hear them in that language. And no one thought to involve me in the conversations that were happening in English about the woman who had a whole life happening in Hungarian. I raised this. Once, on the phone with my mother, I said, I can be on calls with her doctors. I can make sure we're understanding what she's actually telling us she wants, not just what she's able to communicate in her second language when she's tired and frightened. My mother said, I'm here, Mara. You're in Portland. Someone has to be present. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that presence is not the same thing as understanding, and that being in the room with someone and being able to hear them are not always the same skill. I did not say this because I had learned over the course of my entire adult life that this particular conversation would not go the way I needed it to go. I said I would make myself available whenever it would help. My mother said she would keep me in the loop. The loop turned out to have a circumference that did not quite reach Portland. The package arrived at my apartment in late June 2023. I was not expecting anything. The return address was Erji's house in Akron, written in her careful handwriting, the handwriting of someone trained in a different script tradition, where the letters have a particular formal precision that I have always associated with her. The package was priority mail, insured. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on my kitchen counter and opened it. Inside, wrapped individually in soft cloth and dish towels. I recognized the dish towels. They were from her kitchen, the ones with the small embroidered border, were 5 things. The sapphire cocktail ring she had worn to every occasion of any formality since before my father was born. The 3-piece pearl set she had received as a wedding gift in 1963 and kept in a velvet roll in her top bureau drawer. The garnet brooch, the piros virag, and a small gold locket I had seen before but never opened, which she had always worn on Sundays and which, when I opened it, contained a photograph so small I had to hold it at an angle to make out the face. A woman, middle-aged, standing in front of a building with wide steps and a carved stone entrance, squinting slightly in bright light. And there was a note, folded in thirds, written in Hungarian, in her handwriting. I read the note standing on my kitchen counter. I read it twice. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor with the dish towels still spread out around me and the jewelry still in my lap, and I sat there for a long time without doing anything else. I will translate it for you, because I want you to understand exactly what she wrote. She wrote, My Mara, by the time you read this, I will have sent it. And by the time it matters, you will understand why I sent it this way and not another way. You are the one who knows where these came from. You are the one who knows what they cost to carry. I don't want them argued over by people who don't know their names. They have names. You know them. Keep them well. I love you in both languages. Nagi mama. Nagy mama, the Hungarian word for grandmother. She signed the note to me in Hungarian, in the language we shared, in the word I called her. I sat on my kitchen floor and I understood what she had done and what it meant and what she already knew about what was going to happen when she was gone. I called her. She answered on the third ring, which was good. By that June, she sometimes napped in the afternoon, and I was afraid I'd missed her. She said Mara in the way she always said my name, with the Hungarian vowels, the way no one else says it. I said, Nagi mama, a csomag megérkezett. The package arrived. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, Good, I was worried it might have gotten lost. As though she had mailed me a birthday card and not 50 years of family history. We talked for 40 minutes. She told me about the locket. The photograph inside was her mother, Ilona, taken in Budapest in 1958, 7 years after Ilona had crossed the border and 11 years before Erzsi herself would. Ilona had sent the photo as proof of life, as a record, as a way of saying, I am still here. I am standing. I exist in front of this building. Erzsi had kept it inside the locket since 1965, every Sunday, against her sternum. She told me Ilona's name was the one thing she had never said in English, not because she couldn't, but because she hadn't wanted to. It belonged to the other language. Now I had it. I did not tell anyone about the package. She did not ask me to keep it secret. We both understood, without needing to say it, that there was nothing to announce. The jewelry was mine. The note was mine. The conversation was ours. I put everything carefully back in the dish towels and set it on the highest shelf in my bedroom closet. And I thought about my grandmother, her deliberateness, her patience, her understanding of the family she had lived inside for 50 years. And I felt, underneath the grief that was already beginning to arrive for someone still alive, an enormous gratitude. She had not waited for the room to become fair. She had made it fair herself, in advance, on a Tuesday morning at the pharmacy, without telling anyone. She died in December 2023, peacefully, at home. The call came at 6 in the morning Pacific time, which meant 9 in the morning in Akron, which meant she had already been gone for a few hours by the time I heard. I sat in bed for a while. Then I got up and booked the first available flight. The flight and the layover and the rental car took most of the day. I drove 4 hours from the Cleveland airport to Akron in the dark, in December, and pulled into the driveway of my grandmother's house at almost 11 at night. There were still lights on inside. I had expected the house to be quiet and found it full of cars and coats in the entryway and the low sound of voices from the dining room. My mother had organized a gathering. Of course she had. My mother organizes grief the way she organizes everything else. She converts it into logistics before it can do what grief does when you let it sit still. She met me at the door. She said, "We started without you. We figured you'd want us to get this sorted." I had been traveling for 11 hours. My grandmother had been dead for 9. I did not say what I was thinking. I said I'd be right in, and I took off my coat. I walked toward the dining room and stopped in the doorway. There were 4 women at the table. My mother, her sister Ruth Ann, who is not a Voss and never has been. She is a Kaminsky Fowler, who has been adjacent to this family since her sister married into it, and who has, over 30 years of proximity, apparently developed opinions about what Erzsébet Voss would have wanted. My Aunt Carol, who is a Voss, who is Erzsi's actual daughter, who was sitting at the table with the particular expression of a person who knows that something is off, but lacks the will to name it. And a cousin whose presence I noted and subsequently did not think about again. On the table was jewelry. I could see from the doorway that it was not what I remembered from Erzsi's bureau. It was the other jewelry, the department store pieces, the clip-on earrings and colored stones, a few thin chains, a charm bracelet I had never seen her wear. Real enough, sentimental enough to be worth something to the people who would recognize the pieces. Not the pieces that had names. I was standing there, still in my travel clothes, still carrying the exhaustion of the day and the grief of the morning, when I heard Ruth Ann say, To the table, not to me, not knowing I was in the doorway. She wouldn't have wanted Mara to have the good pieces anyway. You know how Mara is. She never appreciated any of this. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt in that moment because it would be easy to say I felt anger and leave it at that. But it wasn't only anger. It was something more complicated. The experience of standing in the doorway of your dead grandmother's house, 11 hours into the worst day of the year, and hearing yourself described by a woman who knew your grandmother only through your mother's marriage, who had eaten at this table maybe a dozen times in 30 years, who did not know one word of Hungarian, who could not have told you what the piros virág was called, or where it came from, or what it cost to carry. The injustice was not just what she said. It was the confidence of it, the ease of it, the way a woman with no standing can walk into a room and speak about what a dead woman would have wanted and have the room not correct her. I did not go to the table. I went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I found Erzsi's tea, the loose-leaf Hungarian blend she ordered from a shop online, the same tea she had made every afternoon of my childhood summers, and I made myself a cup. I stood at the counter and drank it, and looked at the kitchen I had been looking at since I was 6 years old, and I let the grief do what it needed to do for a few minutes without trying to manage it. I could hear the voices from the dining room, the occasional exclamation over a piece, the sound of tissue paper, the low negotiation of women who are doing something they have decided needs to be done tonight, before the quiet sets in, before the permanence of the absence has time to become real. I understood the impulse. I did not share it. Erzi was gone, and I needed her to be gone for a few minutes before I needed her to be anything else. My Aunt Carol came into the kitchen. She has always been kind to me in the absent way of people who are kind by nature but not by attention. She said, with a careful gentleness, "Mara, do you want to come look? There are still some pieces." I looked at her. I said, "What's left?" She described what was on the table. I listened to the descriptions: the gold-toned chain, the marcasite earrings, the brooch with the green stone that I knew was glass because Erzi had told me so, summer of 2007, while she was telling me the difference between genuine stones and imitation ones, and why it mattered to know the difference. None of the pieces Carol described were the ones I was thinking about. I said, "I'm okay. You finish." Carol looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who knows she should say something more, but doesn't know what it is. She went back to the dining room. I finished my tea. I rinsed the mug. I stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard I had played in as a child, and which was now dark and covered in December snow, and which looked, through the window glass, like a photograph of itself. People began moving through the kitchen, coats retrieved, bags gathered, the low talk of dispersal. My mother found me at the counter. She was holding a small dish. She said, "We saved you a few things." In the dish were 2 pairs of clip-on earrings, colored glass stones in gold-toned settings, and a thin bracelet I had never seen Erzi wear in my life. I looked at the dish for a moment. I looked at my mother. I said, "That's all right. I don't need anything from the table." My mother said, "Mara, don't be like that. There wasn't much. Mother didn't have as much as people think." I thought about the shelf in my apartment in Portland. I thought about the dish towels. I thought about the handwriting on the package and the note folded in thirds and the word Nagi Mama written at the bottom of it. I thought about the 40-minute phone call in June and the photograph of Ilona and the name I had been given to carry. I said, "The sapphire ring, the pearl set, the garnet brooch." I set them the way I would read items from an inventory, specific, steady, without performance. The kitchen went very quiet. "The gold locket with the photo from 1958. Do you know what photo?" My mother was staring at me. I continued, "It's her mother, my great-great-grandmother, standing in front of an apartment building in Budapest. I said the word Budapest the way Erzsi said it, with the Hungarian stress on the first syllable. I don't think anyone in the kitchen noticed. I noticed. My mother said, "How do you know about those? Mother kept those put away." I said, "She mailed them to me in June, all 4 pieces and the locket. They've been in my apartment for 6 months." The kitchen was very still. I was aware of Ruth Ann appearing in the doorway from the dining room, Carol at the counter, no longer reaching for her coat, the cousins somewhere behind me, not moving. My mother said, "That's not... Mother never said anything to me about sending things early. I would have known if she'd done that." I said, "She did it on a Tuesday morning when the aide took her to the pharmacy. She packaged them herself. She wrote me a note." My mother said, and it was almost not a question, it was almost something more like recognition, the word arriving before she could fully choose it. "In Hungarian." I said, "In Hungarian?" I want to tell you what happened to my mother's face in that moment, because it is the most honest thing I saw her do in the entire day. What crossed her face was not anger, and it was not betrayal exactly, though both of those were present somewhere underneath it. What it was, mostly, was the expression of a woman who has spent 34 years being the person who knows things about a family, and has just been shown that the most important person in that family had a life she was never given access to, and now never will be. The jewelry was not the thing that undid her. The Tuesday morning was, the aide at the pharmacy, the package mailed carefully, privately, in a language my mother does not speak, to the one person in the family who does. The 40-minute phone calls she did not know about, in a language she never heard. The note signed Naji Mama. The whole private country of it, which had been there all along, which she had been adjacent to for 34 years without ever learning how to enter. She said, Why wouldn't she tell me?" I looked at my mother. I said, quietly, "I think you know why, Mom." I did not say it to wound her. I said it the way you say something true to someone you have decided to stop protecting from the truth. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the particular gentleness of telling the truth gently, rather than not telling it at all. She did know why. She had always, somewhere underneath the organizing and the logistics and the group emails and the gathering she had assembled 9 hours after her mother-in-law's death to divide jewelry that turned out not to be the jewelry, she had always known that the room she could not get into was real. She had just spent 34 years declining to acknowledge it. I set my mug in the sink. I picked up my coat from the chair. I said I was going to drive to the hotel and get some sleep, and that I would be back in the morning to help with whatever needed doing. And I meant both things. I made my way toward the front door. In the hallway, for a moment, it was just my mother and me. She said, "She loved you more." I stopped. I did not turn around. I held the door handle and I thought about how to say the true thing, and only the true thing. I said, "She loved us differently. She just knew me better." I opened the door and went to my car. I sat in the driveway for 5 minutes. The car was cold, the windows fogged at the edges. The house was lit from inside, and I could see the silhouette of my mother through the kitchen window, standing still at the counter, not doing anything. I watched her for a moment. Then I started the car, and I cried the whole drive to the hotel, which was 12 minutes. And I let myself do that because I was alone in the car, and my grandmother was dead, and I had been holding it since 6 o'clock that morning, and I was allowed. I cried for Erzsi, and not for the jewelry or the table, or my mother's face, or any of the rest of it. I cried because she was gone, and because I was going to miss the Sunday phone calls, and the Hungarian, and the tea, and the kitchen, and the particular way she said my name. That is what the drive to the hotel was for. I gave it that. I went back to the house the following week. There was sorting to do. A house closing is its own kind of work, the work of deciding what an 81-year life's worth of accumulated objects means and where it should go. I did it alongside my mother and my Aunt Carol, and when she was available, the cousin who lives closest to Akron. I did not do it for credit. I did it because the house deserved someone who loved it to close it properly, and I was the person who loved it, and so I was there. My mother did not apologize. I did not expect her to. Not directly, not soon. She called 3 weeks later and said, "I keep thinking about the Tuesday." I said, "Me too." We stayed on the phone for a while without saying very much. I think she was trying to build a picture of a version of her mother-in-law she had never known existed. The version that sat at a kitchen table with bad hands and packaged jewelry carefully in dish towels and mailed it on a Tuesday and wrote a note in a language she had never learned. I think that picture is going to take her a long time to finish. I think it may never be entirely finished. I did not try to help her build it any faster. That is her work, not mine. I only told her the truth and handed it to her. What she does with it is her business. Carol sent me a text 2 weeks after the funeral. She wrote, "She always said you were the one who really knew her. I think I knew what that meant, and I didn't want to." I read it 3 times. I wrote back, "She talked about you too. She was proud of you." That was true. I had the phone calls as evidence. I have not told Carol about the phone calls in any detail, partly because they are mine, and partly because some of what Ergi said in them was said in the privacy of her own language, and that privacy is still hers, even though she is gone. I had the garnet brooch appraised, not to sell it, but because I wanted to know its full story, from the direction of expertise rather than family memory. The appraiser said, Hungarian Art Nouveau, circa 1905 to 1910. Very good condition given its age. Quality of craftsmanship consistent with a workshop in Budapest. She named a value that surprised me. Not because I didn't believe the brooch was beautiful, I had always known it was beautiful, but because the number was considerably larger than anything anyone at that dining room table had been calculating when they looked at what was on it. I put the appraisal document in the same box as the note. I have not told my mother the number. I don't see the purpose. The locket sits on my desk. I had the photograph inside digitized, professionally scanned, enhanced, the image restored so the face became fully visible. A woman in her 50s, dark-haired, well-dressed in the way of a person who has something to prove to the street she is standing on, squinting in bright summer light. The apartment building behind her has a carved stone entrance and wide steps. Budapest, 1958. I knew whose face it was the moment I saw it properly, because Ergi had described her mother to me so specifically, so many times, in Hungarian, that Ilona's face was already in my head before I saw it in the locket. I had copies made and sent them to every member of the family. My mother, my Aunt Carol, the cousins, Ruth Ann, everyone. With each copy, I included a note that said only, Erzsébet's grandmother, Budapest, 1958. Her name was Ilona. No one in the family knew her name before I sent the note. I had known it since the summer I was 9 years old, at the kitchen table in Akron, learning the word for grandmother and the word for brooch, and the name of every woman in the line of women who had carried both. I have thought in the months since about what my grandmother was doing when she made her decision in June. I used to wish when I was younger that she had defended me more explicitly, that she had said out loud, in English, in front of everyone, "This is the one I trust. This is the one who knows. This is the one I am giving the real things to." But that was never who she was. She did not make speeches. She did not perform her preferences at the dinner table. She made decisions. She packaged things carefully. She mailed them on a Tuesday. She wrote a note in the language she loved me in. I understand now, 1 year later, sitting with everything she left me. The jewelry, yes, but also the language, the stories, Ilona's name, the summer kitchens, the 40-minute phone calls. I understand that that was her standing up for me. It was just so quiet that no one heard it except me. That was the point. That was, I think, exactly the point. She knew what would happen when she was gone. She had known Diane for 34 years, and she had watched her organize the family's life, and she understood, with the specific clarity of a woman who has spent 6 decades reading rooms, what the room was going to look like after she was no longer in it to change it. So she made it so the room could not change what she had already decided. She put the real things somewhere safe. She filled the table with something else. She trusted that I would understand, when the time came, what she had done and why. And she was right to trust that, because I did understand it. I understood it completely, standing at her kitchen sink, drinking her tea, 9 hours after she died, listening to the sound of women in the next room, negotiating over things that were never going to be what they were looking for. They were arguing over her memory, and they had the wrong pieces, and the right pieces were already safe. That was her last act of love. It was also, I think, and this is the part of it that makes me smile, even now, even in the grief, it was also her last act of mischief. She was always better at both than anyone gave her credit for. She was a woman who crossed a border at 22 with a phrase book and a plan. She was a woman who kept a brooch in a coat lining and called it her witness. She was a woman who sat at a table with bad hands in June and packaged 5 objects in dish towels from her own kitchen and mailed them on a Tuesday when nobody was watching, because she had decided that some things needed to be settled before anyone else got the chance to unsettle them. She was very good at deciding things. I learned that from her, along with the language, along with everything else. I want to ask you something because I have been sitting with this question since June and it has not gotten smaller. Was there someone in your life who loved you quietly, who didn't make speeches or take your side out loud, but who showed you what they thought of you in some other way, some private way that took you years to fully understand? Because I got a package in the mail and I have been understanding it ever since. A package wrapped in dish towels with a note in Hungarian from a woman who knew me well enough to mail it and trust me to know what it meant and say nothing at all to anyone who couldn't read the note. I think about that choice, the steadiness of it, the patience, the faith in me that it required. I think about it every time I look at the locket on my desk or the brooch in its cloth or the note I keep in the box with the appraisal document. I think, she loved me in both languages. She told me so. She wrote it down in the one she knew was mine. That turned out to be enough. It always was.